What is up, everybody, and welcome to the Salt Lake City podcast. I am your host, Eric Nilsson, and I'm so excited to be with you all today because today is the day that we launch the inaugural Salt Lake City podcast episode. Now, as you've probably seen from social media posts and the title of this episode, but we are going to be interviewing George and Charlie Cardon, the founders of the Edison House, a new social club that opened up in downtown Salt Lake City in November of 2022, so still a very recent thing. Hearing about them, of their upbringing in Salt Lake, them moving away for a little bit and coming back to start this amazing community that they've built at Edison House. One thing to note before jumping into it is there is a small period during the podcast where the audio goes a little bit quiet and a little bit low quality, but it does come back and thankfully is not during an important part of the conversation. So when you get to it, either skip ahead to when it gets better or just power through. But without any other further ado, let's hear from the Cardins. So welcome everybody to the first episode of the Salt Lake City podcast. This is one I've probably been the most excited to record because of the kind of build up to being a part of it, but then also kind of seeing how it's become what it is. And I'm talking about Edison House. For those who don't know, Edison House is the newest social club in Salt Lake City. Just been really engaging and really creating a true community in the area and in this city for this younger generation to kind of grasp hold to in a place where there's been a little bit more, let's call it stuffy presence of sorts. And so I'm here with Charlie and George Cardin, the brothers and co-founders of Edison House, where we're going to talk about a little bit about them and their upbringing in early days in Salt Lake, how they came to found and create this really cool space, and then what they hope in the future. So excited to have you guys and welcome to the pod.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
Yeah.
Obviously, you guys are born and raised in Salt Lake and kind of want to hear about what life was like for you and your upbringing. But so can you kind of walk us through, where you grew up, kind of the schools you were with, some of your kind of closest friends, best memories.
George, go for it. We grew up in the same household, so we probably have a lot of the same stories. Different perspectives on some of them for sure, though. Both from Salt Lake City, though. Yeah, we're born and raised here. We're actually, I think we're 8th generation Utahn. Is that right? Yeah. So both of our ancestors on our parents' side, and both mom and dad's, are actually came across the prairie and are Mormon pioneers.
The OGs.
Yeah, but we're not Mormon though. We grew up not Mormon. I think it was like our great grandparents that broke away. So we grew up not Mormon in Salt Lake, and I feel like for us that was actually, at least for me, sort of a part of an important dynamic, I would say, for me when I think about what it's like in Salt Lake, because it felt sort of like there was an in crowd and an out crowd, and it's nothing to do with the Mormon faith. It's more just there were the people who were, that's sort of that their community was, and then everyone else, sort of had to find our own community as well. And I actually, it's fun, now that we're talking about and working on community with a lot of our life. The Mormon faith has an incredible community, and learned a lot. I've learned a lot from just growing up on that. We're Salt Lakers, born and raised. George, you're what, 4 years older than I am?
Yep, hung around for 4 years. I was so cool. Mom and dad wanted 2 more. So I came around.
That's not mom and dad's story though. The story that I heard is that I barely got born. So, and I think that's definitely your fault, not Maddie's fault. So Maddie's our middle sister.
Got it.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm just, the honest truth is, we had a fairly normal childhood. I think obviously the dynamic here with the LDS church, was maybe foreign to anybody who's not from here. We went to different schools. Charlie went to Highland and kind of went the public school route through Indian Hills, and I went to Roland Hall. So I actually didn't have as much kind of direct exposure to the LDS faith or that community as Charlie did, just because Roland Hall is quite small and it's actually not very LDS. So the people who are my peers, I wasn't as exposed to that. But I don't know. It's kind of fun, funny enough, I actually wasn't the most social, certainly wasn't the most popular kid in high school. I had lots of friends, but I sort of drifted between friend groups. I was sort of friends with everybody, but not best friends with anybody, which I think actually did kind of give me an interesting perspective when it eventually came time to start thinking about what it actually meant to build a community here in Salt Lake. But yeah, I mean, our growing up, our upbringing was great. Our parents were fabulous and great support system, and I think sort of set all of us off on, you know, the right path of life, so to speak. And
yeah, we're really fortunate. Mom and Dad are pretty awesome. They're they treated us right, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out a way to make my high school youth days like super exciting.
Well, you weren't really a troublemaker at all. I mean,
no.
The only thing that comes to mind, I don't even know if this counts as troublemaking, is like George. He loved the Utah Jazz. He still loves the Utah Jazz, and he won back to back.
Something like that.
2 or 3.
I used to like
costume dress ups. Oh God, I wish we could get these photos out. He was dressed as a genie. He wore a toga one night. These are when the Jazz were in the playoffs. These have got to be on the internet.
I mean, still have that streak. I literally went to a Notre Dame football game dressed as a leprechaun last year.
So
that did factually happen, like as a 33-year-old.
I love that. So you said you had kind of like jumped around from like friend group to friend group, because I was very similar like that, where I had kind of my like core group of friends were my neighborhood, but like I was a kid who could walk down, and I don't mean this in like an arrogant way, but like I just had a lot of diverse friends and could like sit and talk with anybody. Was that mostly based off like different activities you were engaged in, or were you just the person who could be put in a room with a wall and the wall would be your friend 5 minutes later?
Something like that. I mean, I will say I think I probably developed a little bit more charisma as I got older, but you know, whatever that means in high school. I mean, yeah, it wasn't around shared interests. Obviously, yeah, I'm a huge music person. I mean, that was always something that has been super important in my life. But as it relates to how I would connect with other people, it was more on like a personality, like kind of energy basis, so to speak. And I have been fortunate to find ways to connect with lots of different types of people. I'm a very curious person by nature. I mean, I even remember, and I've always been kind of an old soul, so to speak. I mean, when I was probably, I don't know how old I would have been, but I can remember being fairly young and always wanting to hang out with my parents and their friends. Because maybe it was just a maturity thing, or I just was interested in like adult concepts, adult ideas. I remember, you know, my parents would have dinner parties on a Friday night, and like instead of going and hanging out with my friends, I'd be like, "Can I come to the dinner party?" You know?
You already put on your Brooks Brothers sport coat.
I was
ready
just
to go.
I was that weird little nerd kid who just was like, but it came from a genuine place of curiosity and wanting to actually get to know these people. And like to this day, I consider myself like legitimate friends with a large number of my parents' friends. Yeah. I mean, I remember like couple of years ago, me and my husband went up and spent like a weekend with Tim and Marina. Like Tim went to college with my mother. my parents weren't there. You know, like,
parents were like, "What'd you do this weekend?" Be like, me and Tim and Marina, we had a great time, backgammon and whiskey and all sorts of things.
But I have a lifelong history of just making friends with all people from all walks of life.
Got it. So I kind of want to keep this theme of community going, because I think it's, such an integral part of what you guys have done at Edison House. And that's something that I've kind of come to realize, and I like kind of the way that you put it, Charlie, is like, especially growing up, you don't really see it until you can look back kind of post-mortem and say, oh, there definitely was like an in and an out. Like I remember seeing the kids who were in LDS get made fun of because they were in a church on Sunday, and like we were all so naive and young that we couldn't really put together like why that was happening. Right. And now on the flip side of things, like that is one thing that makes Utah so strong, is because you have these people in these neighborhoods, and pretty much everybody knows their neighbors and knows everybody. I mean, it can also be a bad thing sometimes when everyone's too much in your business, but I mean, in other places that I've lived, it definitely doesn't have that same sort of like interconnectedness that we had. And I love that you two kind of have these two disparate experiences, where you have Charlie, who goes to Highland and has this very public school experience, just like I did. And then we have George, who did, the Roland Hall track, which, I knew a bunch of people went there and kind of echoed those same sort of sentiments. And especially wasn't until I went to college and, joined, Sigma Chi, the fraternity, where I interacted with a ton of judge kids. And I was like, oh, there's this whole other kind of community of the non-LDS people who it's like the Juan Diegos and the judges and the Roland Halls, and like all of those people kind of all knew each other but I was never involved with that, or I didn't really understand until kind of now as I meet kind of people in like, let's call it adulthood and see how that all comes together. So is there a reason why Charlie decided to go to the home of the Rams down the block in Roland Hall, or did they just like George more, or how'd that work?
Well, the joke I always say is that my parents ran out of money halfway through George's education, so I had to go public. But in reality, I wanted to play football. And so they didn't have football at Roland Hall. I actually did go to Roland Hall for 1 year and just wasn't really for me. But I really wanted to play sports. I loved football. So I went to Highland mostly to play sports.
Cool.
And it's really, it's close. I grew up with a lot of the kids who went there, went to Indian Hills, and all of the kids that are in that school funnel into Highland. So sort of like my group that I was with all the way from when I was young, all, funneled into Highland. So that's how I ended up there. But Roland Hall, I did it for 1 year, but it wasn't the right fit for me. I still don't really know why, but I was the new kid. I don't know if you ever been the new kid. I was the new kid for 1 year, and I was too soft to like power through it and like become not the new kid the next year. And I was like, I'm going back.
Oh, I can relate. So my parents got divorced when I was 10. And so I grew up predominantly in the Avenues until then. And then we moved kind of like Yellcrest area. And so I went to Ensign through the end of 4th grade and then moved and did 5th and 6th in Bonneville. And I remember going in and like that area, I mean, you guys are probably familiar. It's like very close knit. Yeah. Everybody knows everybody. Like you mentioned one name and all of the other names kind of tend to domino around. And so I walk in as this kid who, I mean, my mom's a single mom, so she isn't friends with all of those women. And it's just like, well, who the hell is this kid that showed up? And I remember I would go home every day and be like, Mom, I don't want to go back to this prehistoric school because it's old school. And kind of like knew a couple familiar faces from doing like swim team and stuff in the past, but definitely can understand that like new kid, like sitting alone, kind of not knowing how to make friends super well and kind of like always trying to like almost force your way in. And that's never fun. Even in adulthood, if I try to find myself in a new situation, I'm like, shit, here we go again. Just go talk to someone and kind of make it what it is.
It's hard. I mean, a large part of what we're doing at Edison House is trying to help people meet, friends and make connections. And it's challenging, even with, a beautiful space and all the programming and all of that, it still takes work and investment. And, but what part of the reason I love what we're doing is I find the most enjoyment in my life are the relationships I have. And the most relationships I have are my friends. I have my family and I have my amazing girlfriend. But outside of that, it's like, I have 100 relationships with people that I really care about, and that really brings a lot of joy to my life. Totally. And so I find an immense amount of fulfillment in trying to, create spaces and opportunities for people to make those connections, because it's hard. It's hard. Even within Edison House, it can be challenging, and outside of it, I find it extremely hard to make friends and just meet people and get out there.
That might say something about you, Charlie.
Well, George and specifically his husband Matthew are like the ultimate social butterflies. So you might not even understand the challenge, George.
No. All George does is sits down and starts playing the piano, and next thing you know, there's 20 people and
20 girls. When I was young, I used to be so jealous. George would sit down and play the piano, and like girls love when you play the piano, and George would have, like, girls would be swarming.
What a waste.
I'd be like, wrong team, ladies, wrong team.
Hindsight makes that story even better.
Exactly, I know.
Oh, I love that. So I like that you guys kind of had this, because you guys are 4 years apart. So my next oldest sister is like 3.5 years apart, and like we're close, but not like really close. Like today she's one of my best friends. She's like one of the people I can talk to anything about. Have you guys always had this similar bond and kind of this like strong brotherhood, or when did that start to show up?
That's a good question. I mean, we were always like amicable. I don't know. I used to kind of harass Charlie and Bull.
Usual older brother stuff.
Yeah, right. I used to whip his ass on the the living room floor and all that shit. Okay. But he still doesn't like that. Yeah, okay. But no, I mean, I think like you alluded to, the 4-year gap is enough to create legitimate separation when you're younger, because when you're in 7th grade, that's a very different life space than when you're in 11th grade, right? When you're like a junior in high school. So and then obviously you graduate and you go off and do your thing. So we've always had a very positive relationship. We never had like animosity between us, but I would say that the strength of our relationship when we reached adulthood, it definitely solidified. I mean, Charlie, I think going to Notre Dame after I went to Notre Dame created a common sort of bond between us that sort of set our relationship on a closer path. And then obviously with like starting a business together, like that's a whole new sort of arena. So,
which I applaud. Like, I love my family so much, but the thought of like, okay, like see you tomorrow morning and then see you at family dinner and see you on the holidays, see you here. Like that's a whole nother level of familial relationships that, I mean, I applaud. Like one of my best friends is a dentist who's works for his dad and is working on taking over that practice. And it's like, I just see him like, oh, so you just see your dad like all day, every day? He's like, yeah, but he's like there's like work dad and then there's like family dad. Yeah. And they're like two almost very different people. And so that's awesome that you guys have had, I mean, a good foundation to begin with of growing up in the same household. And I mean, sounds like there wasn't any, bad blood or like, hatred, but it just kind of, as time went on, just that grew stronger and became more and more strong. And I mean, obviously you guys decided to do this together, and I don't think anybody would do it if they're like, hey, I kind of iffy about you, but are you in? Yes or no?
I mean, and there's always that sort of extra risk. We talked about it early on in that, like, we're not going to let the business ever get in between like family relationships. And you say that early on, and we've been fortunate there hasn't been that issue, but we talked about that up front. We were like, we want to always put our relationship as brothers first, and our father's involved. And so he, made us sit down and say, hey, we got to talk about this because this is another layer of risk that goes along with working together, you know? But we're lucky. We haven't had, I mean, we go at it, but like, we always come back to the middle. One of the things that I actually say is really useful about working with your brother, if you have a good relationship, is it feels like I can actually push the boundaries a little more than I could with another co-founder, or at least a co-founder you'd have to have years and years of trust with them, where we can really push the boundary and get mad at each other and, really push the boundary and always come back really quickly. And so the level of sort of like transparent communication that occurs between us is really high, which is so helpful in business.
Oh, without a doubt.
The politics are like zero.
So I like that dad is coming involved in like, hey, if you guys are going to do this, here's some ground rules that you need to have because this could flop tomorrow, but to be able to walk away and say, hey, still love you, brother, like on to the next, whatever that might be. I mean, what kind of role did your dad play in like your childhood or early ages to kind of set this foundation of you wanting to do this? Or maybe it was completely out of the wheelhouse of what he had done previously?
Yeah, well, I before we jump to that, I actually want to clarify something because I think it's an important distinction. I wouldn't say that Jeff said, here are the ground rules, because Jeff very much treats us like adults. And you saying like, here are the ground rules is the way you would treat like your children when they're children. Yeah. And I think that's just a really important distinction around like why this relationship and this dynamic has been successful. It's because we all have a lot of mutual respect for each other, not just like as family. Like family is the foundation for like the love and the trust, and that you need that before anything else. But like to function as like as a business unit, you also have to have like that respect that's based on each other as like functioning adult human beings,
competent people. Like, because it's one thing to have family, and I think everybody can agree that like there is probably some sort of family, whether it's close family, siblings, cousins, second cousins, whatever. But there's like, I would not start a business with this person because I don't think they're competent and they couldn't do it. Which is like, you can still love them, for sure, and like they can have their own strengths. But like, I like the way that you put that, Charlie, where it's like, oh, like we had this family relationship that was strong. We loved each other. We trusted each other. But on top of that, we could look at each other and say, hey, you're a competent person with skills that I think we could do this and execute well. And you're someone I would want to back and like, let's go do this together, instead of just saying, hey, you know what? Like, love you, appreciate you, but this is my thing, maybe in the future, but for now, thanks, but no thanks.
Right. Yeah, totally. I mean, and if it didn't go well, it wouldn't be, I went into this with rose-colored glasses about George's competency. It would be us as a team, we're equals, and like if it works great, it's because we equally put in the time and we're equally successful. And if it doesn't go well, same thing. And I think that can be part of that can be an issue that arises with a lot of founders, where if things aren't going right, you start pointing fingers if you don't respect the other person's competency, and that was never the case.
And I think we've all heard of like so many examples of that, both like personally and like, call it like case studies or stories you hear through the interwebs.
Yeah.
That it just slowly like starts to blow up, and then they hate each other and can't come back together. And it's, not what anybody would want to come back to. And I like that when it's family, it usually there's that vested interest that's a little bit more strong of saying, this doesn't matter, you matter more than whatever this could potentially be.
Right. And we say all this, and I've also seen and witnessed family businesses blow up. So like, I also feel very fortunate that, things are going well too.
Yeah.
Makes it a lot easier, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Totally. But so kind of want to talk about like your parents' influence on this, but was this something that when you were growing up, you're like, I want to start my own business, I want to do my own thing, or your dad or mother or whoever was these influences saying, or teaching you about all of these core concepts and principles and thinking about it in a certain way? Are there examples, or did this start that early?
Yeah. Well, Jeff, was one of the founding members of the company that he spent his whole career with, which is Wasatch Global Advisors. He was like the third or fourth employee and built it into like a powerhouse in the finance industry. So, that was always kind of part of our family history. And obviously there's a great deal of respect and admiration that goes along with that. By nature of like, you inherit your family story and kind of what that means. I won't speak for Charlie, but I would imagine he probably feels similarly, which is, that begets a very serious like interest in entrepreneurship and starting your own business. And also there's a part of you that maybe just sort of self-identifies with that because it's kind of like where you came from.
Yeah.
And I would say too, for me, I always felt like seeing, dad be really successful. He never put external pressure on us to sort of chase being really successful in business. But for me personally, created a lot of internal pressure to try and to kind of, really take your career seriously and really try and strive for success. And this is kind of something that I actually didn't know within myself or really understand until, within the last few years. I don't know.
Charlie stresses more than I do.
I do stress. I do stress a lot. I worry. Only the paranoid survive, dude.
I just don't like to lose.
But there is,
So.
hey, lose. But there was something for sure for us about like, at least for me personally, where seeing him being really successful, I was always like, I need to do that in order to have his approval. And that was not external given to me. It was something that I kind of produced within myself just by growing up around him,
Well, so it's always interesting how that is, right? Because so my family, my mother's a pediatrician, my father's he's retired now, but a pediatric neuropsychologist, and I couldn't be further away from medicine in my life, and like that is the biggest like non-starter to me. Where now I work in, data analytics, and I just look at numbers all day and tell people what they mean. But then I have like my sister who's a PA and like very involved, in medicine and everything. So it's so funny to see how there can sometimes be this huge correlation between kind of parents and what they're doing and demonstrating and making that actually happen and like passing that down compared to like, like thanks, but maybe no thanks in the long run. So I love that he was able to, and like, especially like a healthy way to say, hey, here's the example I'm setting. I built this thing that turned into something really special. I'm not going to put this weird pressure on you that says you have to go build something on your own, but to really see that example and in turn say, how cool would it be to do something similar? So I love that that kind of guided you in a healthy way instead of just a anxious and like overbearing way that you can, we can probably all think of 2 to 3 people in our own personal lives that goes that way.
For sure. And it's for me, like I've done a lot of more self-reflection in the last few years, and I've come to realize, and anybody who like studies psychology is going to be like, yeah, no shit, dude, is like the level of influence that your parents impart on you in both, overt and invert ways, where they're like, telling you exactly, yes, do this, don't do this. And then the way they act and the way that, you see them in setting examples, it's pretty, for me, it's been really eye-opening and really interesting to sort of self-reflect and be like, wow, I see where a lot of these things in the way that I act and the way that I think, where a lot of that comes from. Yeah. And self-awareness for me has always been like, or has been recently been like the sort of first step to really starting to understand all your motivations, why you do things. Because everything you do for a reason. You just don't always know why,
Totally.
And I found it's been interesting for me to see how much of that comes from sort of that history. I don't know if like George, you feel this way at all, or you do, Eric, but like this has been a self-realization I've had in the last few years.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's no question that your childhood influence is super important. And I do spend a lot of time thinking about. I would probably say that I spend more time thinking about how to change my behaviors than I do about like where the root of those behaviors come from. Even though I understand that they're intrinsically tied to each other, but I'm very much like all the books I read are about like how the brain works, and that there are angles on psychology that I find super interesting. I have spent not as much time doing like the classic like Freudian self-reflection, but I do find the human brain super fascinating in terms of how people behave and how you can motivate and both yourself and other people and yeah, I mean, like we could get into like the reptilian brain versus like the developed brain and all these other sort of like angles, but I do share an interest in that.
Totally. No, I'm the same way because like it wasn't till because I think of like my 20s as almost like a wash, except for like the maybe later part, and it wasn't until like I was a lot more introspective and thinking about like almost the way I think, where I mean, as like a childhood and early adult, like you see your parents and you see their behaviors, but it isn't until then you're like, oh, I do this in the same way that they do that, or this correlates the way they are, or now I understand why they do these things because I am inherently part of them, and there's so much correlation behind it. And that's, yeah, I mean, we could spend hours on that subject. But cool. So I want to talk, kind of transition into post Utah. I love that you guys both left Utah for a period, and it's so interesting that you both ended up at the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. I mean, so Charlie, what was your decision process of deciding to go to Notre Dame?
Well, I was the little brother who went and visited.
Or I guess sorry. Let's start with George.
Oh, you want to start with George?
Yeah, let's start with George because it's going
No,
chronological.
I'll answer your question for Charlie. Cool older brother one here. Let's do it. No, I mean, I knew two things. Well, I knew three things. I wanted to go to a good school. I wanted to get out of the state of Utah, and I wanted to go somewhere that had a good football team. Notre Dame checked all three.
Check.
Wow. So there you go.
Awesome. And when did you study there?
Finance. I was a finance degree.
Nice. I was a finance major as well. So what was did you start off as a finance major knowing what you're going to do, or what was that?
Well, at Notre Dame,
like?
Notre Dame, they do general, like they don't actually allow you to declare until you're a sophomore. And then I entered the School of Business, and then same thing. They don't actually allow you to specify your major, I think, until your junior year. I never like switched tracks significantly. I didn't have any goal, or some people are like adamant, I want to be in VC or whatever. I just had a broad interest in business and it seemed like the thing to do. There you go.
And Dad was a finance guy, there you go.
Yeah.
As we talked about.
I'm sure that is. Yeah, I'm sure that is.
Totally. No, I love that. It's always interesting to see people's processes because, like, for me, for example, I started at the U and I was like, I am going to be a architect. That is what I wanted to do. I love playing with Legos. I love building connects. And then I sat through my first intro to architecture class and I was like, nope, not even a little bit. Like, this is not not enough jobs, not enough money, not enough creativity, or my type of creativity, I should say. And then and I could talk about it forever, but it's like architecture, civil engineering, pre-pharmacy. I don't know what the hell I'm going to do. Let's go check out business. I'm a numbers, social, collaborative person, gravitated towards finance, and then kind of been the rest is history for there. So I always love seeing how people kind of either go in with a hypothesis and then are like, it's not what I thought it was going to be.
And does you make you take a bunch of classes, sort of like a baseline general classes for the first few years, or do you go right into your major?
I mean, there's always like the prereqs for like the major itself, which in essence are pretty exploratory, but there definitely isn't as much of like an intentional, hey, you can't focus on anything specifically until you have these years of foundation under you to understand, which I think is absolutely the right way to do it. Like, no one knows what the hell they're even people that graduate, they don't even know what the hell they're doing.
Yeah, they just changed it at Notre Dame, where if you want to go to the business school route, undergrad business school route, you have to apply into that business school coming out of high school. and I don't think they require you to take all business classes when you first get there. But for me, I'm like, man, I had no freaking idea what I wanted to do. And I found taking all these prereq classes where they're like, take, writing XYZ or, philosophy of this. I found all that extremely helpful in being like, what am I interested in? What do I want to spend the next, 30 years of my life doing?
Yeah, no, I think that's wise. And because the University of Utah has something similar about that, graduate apply toward business of the business scholars. And that always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I'm like, does anybody ever graduate high school and it's like, hey, I'm going to go business. That's that is it. Ready, set, go.
Not very many.
Not very many.
Not me.
Cool. So that's, so Charlie goes in, gets all his things done, does business, says, finance speaks to me. So what was your decision process of saying, you know what, I'm going to follow Big Brother's footsteps and I'm going to go to Notre Dame as well?
Well, for me, I had a semi-similar process. I was looking more for a school that was really fun and a school that was not in the state of Utah and a school that was good. I didn't have the football thing. I was kind of surprised to hear that, George. And I went out to visit Notre Dame while George was there, and when I was a couple times throughout my high school, and went out there when they had a football game going on, and it's just like the most fun in the entire world. It's full day activities with beer pong and tailgating and tradition and everything, and I just immediately fell in love with it. So I was like, this is where I want to go. I kind of didn't even really explore, honestly. After I went out and had that experience, I was like, didn't really explore anywhere else. I applied other places. Obviously, I wasn't sure I'd get into ND. But I was like, this is it. And I'm still a huge fan. I'm a huge Notre Dame guy.
Totally. And so after college, I moved to Seattle, and I'm not sure if you guys know, but Seattle is a place where, Michigan places a ton of students, Notre Dame places a ton of students. So there's this huge presence of Midwest. Mm-hmm. And everybody I talked to was like, it was the time of my life. Cause it's a college town. Everybody wraps their heads around it. There's so much community. Again, the theme of community keeps coming on in its way through. And so, I'm always envious of people who are able to get away from Utah and go do kind of an out of state, more traditional college experience. Cause don't get me wrong. I had a great experience at the University of Utah and everything that I experienced there. But there's always part of me that was like, it would have been fun to get away, get out and go kind of have this almost tight knit area, or almost this just super concentrated area of college.
Well, you did your van 6 month. I think everybody wishes they could do 6 months in a van. So sounds like you made up for it.
Net, we all got what we wanted to some extent. So, okay, so let's talk about after school. Cause I know, Charlie, you moved to New York for a little bit and got that experience there. Charlie,
Chicago.
Chicago. Yes. You moved to Chicago and had that experience. Charlie, what was your, pre-Edison, post-Notre Dame experience like?
Yeah, so I moved to Chicago, which is really common out of Notre Dame.
Makes sense.
I'd say maybe a quarter to half of the kids out of the business school moved to Chicago. I moved there. I was kind of looking for jobs in private equity and venture capital. Cool. It was right. It seemed like there was this period.
Sorry, we didn't talk about what did you study at Notre Dame?
I studied finance.
Okay.
Yeah, and I went in.
Two peas in the same pot.
I know, right? All of us. It seemed like there's a bit of a switch where there used to be a very clear path where you had to go investment banking, private equity, or investment banking, MBA, venture capital, right? There's a couple firms, though, that especially smaller, even startup firms, which is where I ended up landing, that were taking kids right out of undergrad. And so I really wanted to work on the buy side. Mm-hmm. Our dad, Jeff, he's been an investor his entire life, so I kind of absorbed a lot of that and really enjoyed the process. And so I wanted to go onto the buy side. So I was looking for jobs in the buy side and landed at a company called Birchwood Healthcare Partners, which at the time was a startup private equity firm. So our founder, Isaac Dole, and Ratul Shah had just started this firm maybe a year and a half before. There were 3 other partners when I got there. So there was a total of 4 people plus myself, and the 4 people were partners. So I was
scrappy.
The one young guy. Yeah, I did everything, and it was actually really fun. It was a great experience for starting a business because I got to do just a whole bunch of stuff that a small business does. I did everything from like help out with accounts payable at times. Like I would sometimes have to go to our portfolio companies and help out with accounts payable, which is like a very like small businessy thing, and did a whole bunch of stuff like that. So it ended up being a great foundation for me to, start a business. And I also got a really great exposure to finance and sort of thinking through investments, building financial models, all the sort of traditional things you do in a private equity or investment banking role. And I find that also to be really helpful as well. So that was, it was a really fun experience. I was like, I'm never leaving Chicago. I love Chicago. I had so much fun there. Still a ton of friends there. But George called one day and was like, hey, I got this like kind of crazy idea. What do you think about this? And at first I was like, no way, dude.
Yeah. Good idea.
Pass.
Yeah,
exactly. It felt so sort of new, and like at the time, Soho, who's kind of what we're mostly modeled off of.
Let's pause there for a sec. I want to go to George and his experience after, and then we can get to him in that phone call. So you graduate from Notre Dame, and what was your path, George, as far as steps after college?
Well, I lived in Indianapolis. I worked for Angie's List. I did a lot of different things for Angie's List. Really enjoyed my time there. Learned a lot about a lot of really positive things, a few things not to do. But mostly I have very positive things to say about Angie's List. I think it's one of the strongest like cultures that I've ever seen, certainly within business. Had the opportunity to work in marketing. I worked directly with Angie. Actually, still am in contact with Angie. I talk with her once a quarter. Just spent 4 years there learning. I worked in their product space. I ended up helping them open a department. I also was in data analytics on the business side, not on like the tech side. Really enjoyed it. Yeah, got a well-rounded kind of fast-paced education in like all things startup, and decided I wanted to go to get my MBA. The timing was right. So ended up in UCLA in LA. Also did a 6-month traveling stint. Spent about a month on every continent when I was 25.
Hell yeah.
Which was 8 years ago, which is kind of wild. And then spent a couple of years in LA. Didn't set out to open a social club by any means, but knew that I was hoping to do something entrepreneurial.
So you just had that like itch, and we're just waiting for the right idea,
kind of. Yeah, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I mean, I may even be giving myself too much credit, because I'm not sure that I actually went to UCLA with a hard and fast idea that I wanted to start a business.
And did you meet your husband in California? Or
no, I actually met him in Indianapolis. We ended up moving to LA together.
Nice.
We weren't married at the time, but yeah, we. I actually had generated an interest in the hospitality space. We had an old family friend who was kind of a serial entrepreneur, who sparked an interest in me at a young-ish age in the bar industry.
Hopefully not too young.
Yeah, right. That's why I said young-ish, right? But he had these theories around there being like an arbitrage opportunity in dive bar acquisitions, because these bars were cash flowing at a much higher rate than would be reflected in their financials, because
the old dive bar roll up strategy.
Yeah, that's literally what it was.
God, I heard that a million times.
Literally what it was. And he wasn't totally wrong about it. His theory was correct insofar as if you were to look at what they're reporting on their, to the IRS, like they're taking a lot of money under the counter.
Lots of cash transactions.
A lot of cash transaction, poor cash management, and then there's just kind of like operational, benefits from coming in as somebody who actually knows how to run a business and taking it over from somebody who has no idea what they're doing. So that was where it started. I literally wanted to start a dive bar roll-up business. That was what I started out to research. And so I definitely spent a couple of days, like literally because my theory was I need to know like the full picture of these dive bars. So on like a Tuesday at like 1:30, I would go to like 4 different random dive bars around LA in like the middle of nowhere. And I'll tell you,
what a dream.
You definitely see some characters. It was an interesting insight. Pretty quickly learned that wasn't the environment I wanted to surround myself with for the rest of my career. Very memorable moments. Had a good time. Glad I did it. A couple days was enough. But I did, as we started to actually chase the breadcrumbs, start to uncover, I generated an understanding of these hospitality businesses and what worked about them and what didn't.
Totally.
And so there were all these interesting sort of stones that I would turn over and be like, oh, well, that's kind of an interesting idea. And, I assembled enough of those, and ultimately it led to Edison House and the business model of a social club.
So from all that dive bar experience, let's call it market research.
Yeah,
where I don't
it
know.
Really was.
I just have this
four gin and tonics on a Tuesday afternoon.
I just imagine you just walking in this dive bar. You're like, you guys have a piano? Then they're like, yeah, like I have a tip jar. I'm just gonna sit down and we're gonna see how this goes. The last time I was at a dive bar, I actually did some fantastic karaoke, and it was actually in Santa Monica. So it makes me laugh that you're in LA going to dive bars. I'm like, is this the same dive bar?
Probably.
I can't remember the name because that's how good of a karaoke night it was. But so you're doing all this, you're looking at dive bars to be like, this is kind of interesting. Let's look at these unit economics. Let's look at these operations. You have these guys who don't know how to run a business, ton of opportunity there. I mean, what was that moment where it clicked where you're like, hey, like maybe not this, but that. I think this.
Yeah, I don't know that there was like any single moment. It was an aggregation of a couple of ideas. So one of them was we realized that all these bars were sitting there empty, like, 80% of the time, but they're paying a lease 100% of the time. Mm-hmm. And they're monetizing Friday and Saturday night. They're highly exposed from a risk perspective because they don't have diversified revenue. All their money is contingent on people showing up in this one narrow time. So the question becomes, well, how do you monetize that asset, right? How do you think about monetizing this space that you're paying for 24/7? And there are whole like side economies around that question that we sort of ran down that rabbit hole, right? Like, you can find, I don't know how these businesses are doing today, but at the time, like there were new cropping up. There were new businesses around, like restaurants would lease out their space during the day to small startup, to people who just wanted somewhere to go, right? And so then that begins the question.
I don't know why my brain instantly goes to those like paint and sip classes, because I'd be like walking into like a bar on a Wednesday at 2 and they're like, hey, have a seat and listen to this instruction. I'm like, touche.
Done.
But yeah, like totally. I mean, like then you have like, I can almost see this like brunch proliferation where people are like, oh yeah, let's get people in the morning because they're always there at night. And then, and yeah, like totally see that, like that connection between there's these core times they're making money, which is, Friday, Saturday, weekend nights. Probably some sort of relative consistency during the week. But then at the end of the day, you have this bartender sitting there idle with maybe one depressed dude at the bar. But besides that, that's not going to, pay your,
do much.
Yeah, not going to make a dent in lease payments.
Right. So that was kind of one idea. And then you chase that, right? And it's like, well, people are looking for a place to go. It's like, well, why is that happening? Right? Because there was this whole other side thing that was happening with WeWork and the remote working economy, right? But then so there's that dynamic happening where people are no longer tethered to an office from 9 to 5, and so there was a lot more mobility in people's ability to go wherever they want. And so there were all these just kind of pieces that started clicking into place. Another one, we talk about like non-diversified revenue. Well, the idea of a membership revenue was really sort of one of those critical pieces, because it then unlocks this idea of like, oh, well, all of a sudden you're no longer like highly exposed to day-to-day like operational success. We don't get me wrong, we are very much tied to day-to-day operational success. But if somebody, if we have a slow Friday night, it's not like our business is suddenly at risk, right? It's that there is more leeway and more opportunity for us to build a more long-term relationship with our customers through that. So all of these different pieces started kind of like coming together. It's like, how do you take this idea that people have more free time and the idea that somebody would want to go sit in a bar simply because they need to get out of their house is like really, it was like, well, that's kind of weird. Why is that? Right. And then you chase the rabbit hole of the third place, which has a long history. Starbucks is the third place. That's the original, American third place. They captured this before anybody else. The third place being not your home, not your office. Where's the other place that you're going to spend your time?
Totally.
Right. And so what does that 21st century third place look like? Well, what would you want in a space where you could go and spend your time, right? And then it just kind of started coming together. And then of course, to Charlie's point, there's Soho House. And so this business model does exist. And so then you start doing that research. Well, what are these other clubs? What do these 21st century social clubs actually look like? And you go from A to B to Z, and you end up with a business model that was, I'd say, like 75% of Edison House.
Yeah, and also too, Soho's carrying the torch of social clubs. And that torch has been burning for a long time. I mean, people don't realize this in the U.S., but in the UK, especially in London, social club culture is very important. There are hundreds and hundreds of social clubs in London alone. Mm-hmm. And Soho, we talk about Soho because we're the most similar to them, because they really, in our opinion, kind of reinvented the social club model for today, and brought it over to America. So George was going through this whole discovery in the hospitality space and pieced all these things together, and then said, whoa, look, there's this other company that's doing this. They just started to come to the United States, and they're having a ton of success.
Which has got to be so relieving, because like you have all these thoughts going in your head of, how do I create this space? What's going to incentivize people to be there? How do we make it a viable business model? And all of a sudden, here's this like perfect case study that like almost Kool-Aid mans its ass through your wall to say, hey, this is how this can work. And like, even I was in Austin a couple months ago visiting a friend, and there's a Soho House there that's, pop in, but then there's also like these other different kind of like nuanced social clubs that are popping up. Like there was one, I can't remember the name of it for the life of me, but it's a country club. But then they also have a social club downtown for members where it's like, they have like a really nice simulator, but it's like really great rooftop bar space. So it's like, oh, there's this nuance to it all of kind of seeing how people want to create that space. So, like just thinking of like the timeline of things, what year was this going through your head? Or maybe like the year that you called Charlie and said, hey, I got an idea. Are you in?
Yeah. So I graduated like mid 2018. So it would have been all throughout. The bulk of all this research was happening kind of my second year in grad school, which was like fall of 2017. And we actually set out to do the dive bar, like business model. And then halfway through, like we did the first semester chasing that. And then halfway through, I essentially recruited some of my class, because you do it as a team. Totally. It's like, that's the way that the thesis works. So I had recruited my team of people to help me. And then it became very apparent to me, because I was serious. I was like, I didn't know that I would open a business, but I was thinking about it.
Yeah.
And the others were all like, it was very clear, like they're not going to.
They're just focused
on
their summer internship.
Do. Yeah, right, exactly.
So they can go to
exactly
McKinsey and do their thing and kind of go on.
Exactly. So halfway through, we had done like all this research, and then I basically strong-armed everybody and was like, yeah, we're going to change. We're changing course. We're doing the social club thing. And they didn't really want it. Like, there was a lot of pushback. They were like, we've already done all this research. I'm like, I really don't care, because like, I'm actually going to probably open this business, or I certainly may. And like, I'm just making this call. So I forced all my class, and thank you to all of them for going along with my insistence. And so we spent the next half of the time there, the next semester, essentially kind of like pulling this whole business model concept together.
Love that.
Yeah.
So Charlie, so you get this call from your brother saying, hey, I got this idea. You've been doing, healthcare, private equity. And he says, hey, I got this idea. What was your initial response, reaction to this idea?
My first reaction was kind of like, this is crazy. Neither of us have a background in hospitality. First-time entrepreneurs, in my head, and Edison House even grew in terms of size and scope since we first started. And at the time, even the size and scope felt large, big. We're talking multiple restaurants. we didn't have the rooftop pool at the time, but multiple restaurants, gym, all these things. And I was actually pretty hesitant. I was like, I don't think this is a great idea. But he kind of chipped away at me. He sent me his research deck. What I think really sort of sold me was sending me to Soho House's website and saying, hey, check out what they're doing. And for anyone who hasn't been to Soho House, it's, you know, the main social club, I'd say, of like the last 15 years.
Totally.
They're incredible. I mean, they've got 35 clubs across the US, and any Soho House you go into, you can be like, wow, this is freaking cool. And
I've never been.
Ass.
I've never been.
Are you serious?
I've been to the one in Chicago.
Don't tell people that. Jesus Christ. I was in the one in Chicago like last week. I mean, it's. God.
We'll get you a guest pass.
Oh my gosh! Okay,
I have my own vision of what we're doing.
I mean, you
Charlie.
do own your own.
He has his own club.
You
He
do
I
doesn't
got
need
my
to go
own
visit
club.
someone
I don't need
else's.
Soho House.
But I'll tell you, and you know, they've been around for a long time, so they've had a long time to mature and like, you know, really get it right. And I feel like they really have gotten it right. I mean, did you go to the one in Austin? Did you have a chance?
I just walked by.
You
I
walked
didn't
by.
go in.
I was with the one in Chicago, and it's just like you walk in, it's so cool. The food is great, the music's perfect, the people are cool. You go up to the pool, like they got it dialed in, you know. And the one in Chicago is like 15 years old, you know, so they've really got it dialed in at this point. But that is really what sort of changed my mind on this, because it's such a big swing that it's like, if it doesn't work out, and there's always that opportunity, that there's that possibility, like it's, you know, it's not easy to unwind. And doing that without having someone else who has proven that the model works would have been really hard for me to make that step. Like, I don't think I would have taken the step if I hadn't seen Soho House, being like, this is a totally new thing that like we're just kind of inventing out of thin air, which we're not, right?
Yeah.
I should probably clarify. I have been to many other social clubs. We did a whole trip where we went and visited like a bunch.
That was a badass business trip.
So I have done my due diligence as a
we've been
competitor.
We've done,
but no, yeah. I mean, I think, Charlie's right. Like they built the industry,
and for me, I was just like, I'm not gonna. It's not like a tech startup where, you know, you can do, you know, test it, MVP it, see if it works. It doesn't work. Right. It does work. You go in this direction, right? It's not that way. It's like, you got to take a full ass swing.
All in.
You got to go all in. And I'm like, I've got to have some proof of concept before that happens. Right. And so I applaud Soho for taking that proof of concept, because that's ballsy.
Well, it's also a consistent theme, which is Charlie is more risk averse than I am.
I am. Yeah, there you go. I am. Risk adjusted.
Well, because
it's a good balance.
So I remember the first time I heard about Soho House, like I just saw someone liked a post on Instagram, and it was this post. I have to go back and find it just to kind of giggle at it now, but it was a picture of the lot that we're now, standing in the second floor of a 3-story building. Yeah. And it was just like, I think there's literally goats eating grass, and they're like, not Soho House, Edison House coming 2020 something. And I remember just like my smug dumbass was like, believe it when I see it, you know, like replying.
Oh, was that you? All right.
Yeah. Membership revoked.
I got you back. All right.
You're out. It's over.
Funny.
That's fine.
I actually do remember that. Mostly not at you particularly, but there was you get a fair amount of like snarkiness in the early stages of that. It's like,
I think I'm sure a lot of business founders go through this, but like I call it my yeah buddy phase, which was I would tell people what I'm doing and they say, yeah, okay, buddy. And it was like, we had a long yeah buddy phase, because, you know, we didn't break ground for a year and a half after we decided to do it. So
it was like COVID time.
It's COVID. It was tough.
Because were you guys deciding on doing it before COVID, and then COVID came and threw a wrench in things?
So we purchased the property, and about 3 or 4 months later, COVID happened. And then we broke ground in the middle of COVID, right? Yeah, that was right. We broke ground.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, we broke ground.
But there's a lot that's happened.
But we purchased it, which is like, it's not a point of no return, but like, you know, we've put down serious money to buy the land. We're moving forward. We've hired architects, contractors, bid the project. COVID hits. Mm-hmm. So we were far enough down the road that like there was no, you could turn back, but we were like, we're not turning back. No way.
Thankfully most of our bids were locked in. So at least from a financial perspective, there's quite a bit of financial hedging that had happened that we were not exposed to had we been 6 months later.
When talk about being lucky too, it's like if we had been not far enough down the road and COVID hit, I'm sure we would have just thrown our hands up and be like, there's no way we know what I mean? Like we're not doing this. But if we had been too far down the road and we tried to open during COVID, it would have been the worst experience ever. We actually have a colleague who, I won't say who she is, but she got caught up in the middle of this, was supposed to open during COVID at a beautiful space and just got, steamrolled by it. And it breaks your heart. I mean,
totally
awful.
Like, cause it's actually funny. I like listening to you, George, talk about, putting together your deck and your thesis of like why this is a good thing. So I was actually at one point going to open up like a chopped salad place in Utah because you go to any major city, there's a chopped salad place.
My girlfriend would be there every single day. She
and
talks about this
every
nonstop.
Time I bring this up, someone says it. So, and
we have food and beverage. We have food and beverage support, man. Let's do this. Let's team up.
Let's rock. And I was like, literally had like the analysis down, like everything was like green light. And eventually it got to the point where like, because I was planning on doing it downtown, planning on relying on, the Goldman Sachs, the Wells Fargo built, like kind of that core thing. And then obviously COVID hit. I'm like, well, nope, like absolutely not.
Poof.
And it's still like in the back. Who knows, maybe one day, but
seriously, come find us if you, we got a lot of kitchens you can cook out of and figure out how to do it.
Hey, we can Grubhub the hell out of here.
Oh yeah.
But that's so awesome because like, especially thinking of like such an ambiguous idea that takes, going back to your example in comparison of like a tech startup where, you can get a tech startup going, get an MVP stood up with relatively little investment. Right. And then you can go do the typical route of go raise your money and go scale and product market fit, et cetera. But here it's like, we bought land. We have a building being built. We have all of these other investments. Like that's a lot of CapEx investment. And like, as you're going through this process of, the bidding, the purchasing, getting everything going, what were some of the unexpected headwinds and things that came across?
Oh man. We've ran into a lot.
Yeah,
we can talk. Yeah, we've run into a lot of problems, but I'm sure it's the same with every startup, right? There's always things that go wrong. I would say broadly, the construction process was extremely challenging given COVID and the supply chain. Mm-hmm. What comes to mind when I think about what was really hard the last few years was just like navigating that as first-time developers and then layering on top of that COVID. And it was just like, crazy things where we got a call one day from our contractor and he was like, they're running out of steel. And we had some issues with permits and whatnot. We hadn't figured out our permits, but we had bid the project. And he was like, you need to buy your steel today or we will not get steel for a year and a half. And I'm like, how much money is this? He's like, $400,000. I'm like, what?
Do you take cash or check?
Yeah. I'm like, you're serious? He's like, I'm dead serious. You need to put in the order today and I need to wire the money to them pretty much today. And you have to make a decision pretty much in the next hour. Because
obviously you have a huge history of steel purchasing and acquisition in the past.
The first question I asked him was like, what happens if we don't go through? He's like, you own $400,000 worth of steel. I don't know what happens. You have to go to the mill and pick it up,
And that's how Edison pivoted to the second steel industry of the United States.
In reality, given the price of steel during COVID, we could have made money and just been out, we could have just made out like bandits. But, there's so many of those stories. At one point, the city of Salt Lake, one of their planners had an issue with our rooftop pool. And there was so many things that came up. But I think a lot of that is development broadly. Insofar as it's a complicated challenge. Doing development's complicated and challenging. I did not realize how gnarly it was going to be.
Totally.
Yeah.
Funny story.
I have some funny.
It's probably all funny in hindsight.
It's all funny because
it's
sort of funny because when you, I don't know, maybe it's just I'm a little bit older and have a little more perspective, but the whole thing seems a little nutty now that you say it out loud. It's like, you've never developed, you've never entrepreneured, you've never done, it was we just literally made this shit up. We're going to build this big place with 4 bars and a pool and a gym. We've never done any of this shit.
Sounds like you're building the ideal Barbie mansion, but instead it's an actual building and social goal.
I agree. It is kind of crazy. It also, there's other, I'm just thinking of some other funny, crazy stuff that happened. We were in Costa Rica. We had just started excavating. And George and I are playing we're with our friends drinking and hanging out. And I get a text from our contractor and the hole in the ground, which is probably 30 feet deep, is filled to the top with water. And I don't know if you remember, we had this really intense water storm, like rainstorm.
Yes.
You remember that?
Yeah.
Filled the entire hole. There was a forklift at the bottom that was like floating up. And George and I were like, holy shit, what have we got ourselves into? We literally just broke ground. I mean, 3 months earlier.
Rooftop pool turns into in-ground
ground pool. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that was pretty funny. That was, at the time it wasn't funny, but
now it is. You can always laugh about something once it's been enough time.
right, exactly. I mean, it was hard and funny and whatever, but
So one thing that tends to be a lot of issues is, I mean, I would imagine a situation like your guys' was like alcohol permitting in Utah. Did you guys run into a ton of issues with that?
oh man.
Definitely yes, as a function of the way the legislature has written the law.
Which is probably super easy, convenient, not at all painful.
Well, I would actually say that checking the boxes it wasn't particularly difficult in the sense that I think they actually did make it fairly clear what we needed to do in order to qualify to get a liquor license. Some of the rules made it fairly prohibitive in terms of, like we discussed early on, do you want to be a restaurant so that we can allow kids in and things of that nature. It became very clear very quickly that based on some of the restrictions of non-bar liquor licenses, that we needed to be a bar, right? Most importantly,
Thank you for that important decision.
Yeah. Well, it was a decision we talked about. I mean, we did, we talked about that. And I actually think as a product perspective, it's actually beneficial that we're a 21 and over establishment. I think people appreciate the fact that there aren't children here. But nonetheless, most importantly, if any other liquor license would have prohibited the movement around the club, so you wouldn't be able to like take a drink from one room into the next. And you're obviously a member here, like that just doesn't work. It's not the dynamic here.
You need a whole double your staff of just transportation.
Right. So
just walking with trays.
So I think there were some limitations on that. By far and away, the biggest issue was just the number of liquor licenses available and whether or not we would be able to get one. We actually felt that the DABS and all those involved in like the issuing of the license were fairly easy to work with and made it pretty clear what we needed to do, but they have no say in the number of licenses that they have to distribute. And that was really scary up until essentially the last minute because the DABS made the decision to essentially require that we be ready to open before they would give us a liquor license, which meant we had to staff our 100-person business, take on a very sizable payroll, and prepare ourselves to open our doors without a liquor license.
Yeah.
Up until, I'm trying to think. I think we got our liquor license about a week before we actually opened, which is an enormous amount of risk and trust that they asked us to place in their hands. And thankfully it all worked out. It hasn't been an issue since we've opened. It's been perfectly smooth sailing since then. There was definitely a couple of month period where there were very high stress levels around acquiring a liquor license.
Got it. I guess on like the other side of the coin, what is something that you feel like went better or like just happened to have gone really well that you didn't anticipate?
Well, as I said, I'm kind of like always the optimist, maybe to the point of being a little naive. So I don't know that I don't know that I would have set out on this path if I didn't have like a high degree of confidence that what we were going to do would be successful. But I think I will say like I have been pleasantly surprised to find that it seems like there is a genuine demand for the product the way that we had anticipated. It seems like we have had, I don't know that we talked about this in kind of like my research phase, but one of the things that we really tap into as a product is we actually provide people a sense of belonging. There's a very like fundamental need for people to have a sense of community. We throw that word around very loosely in day-to-day conversation, but it actually is a fundamental like need of human beings.
Without a doubt.
And so it's been very interesting and really nice to see members who have expressed a real degree of gratitude for providing that, to the point where we've had members cry during interviews because they were so grateful. We've had members tell us that they were preparing to move out of the state of Utah until they joined Edison House. We have a number of like really high involved members who have embraced our product and like truly what it means at its like deepest core, and really run with that baton. And that's been very gratifying.
No, and I can echo that 100%, because so as someone who born and raised in Utah, I mean, was raised very LDS, moved to Seattle after graduation, where, I mean, it's a place where I remember having talks about religion like twice maybe, and it just wasn't a thing. And I kind of put it on the back burner, then came back to Utah. I mean, no longer, participating active member. I was kind of done with that in my life. But I also didn't want to go back to like my old social circles, because I had developed as a person. And so I wanted to find a community, especially people who weren't necessarily from here. And so that's when I moved into like hardware apartments, because I knew that there was going to be people not from here, probably wasn't going to be a ton of LDS people, and like trying to find like that community. And I found, like, and I moved in like 2 months before COVID hit. And so all of a sudden we're all locked in this building, and like gained some amazing friends there that, I mean, I still hang out with all the time and still keep in contact with, that are amazing. And still, like, again, during that time is when I saw Edison House, like, oh, that'd be kind of cool of an idea, but don't know if it's going to actually happen, what it's actually going to be like. And then fast forward to now, where I remember walking into the grand opening and being like, oh, like, here's here are the people that I do want to spend time with. And even in my life, because like one thing that I've realized and had so many conversations with friends with is, I mean, your early life, social experiences and social connections are handed to you. Yeah. Like literally you grew up going to the same place every day with the same people, and they become your friends. And like, if you could do that today, where it's like, hey, we're all going to go to the same place. We're going to hang out. We're going to have recess. We're going to play Foursquare and dodgeball. We're going to have music. Like, sign me up.
Let's go. Yeah.
And then you go to college, where that gets amplified even more. And then all of a sudden after that, it's just like this cold, clean cut from these social experiences. And it's like, okay, like go figure it out. And that's really hard for people. And it was like, honestly, pretty hard for me, because I didn't know where to go to find my people or to go find these communities that I needed. But to your point, George, like that is so much part of the human experience, is having a community that you can have. And I mean, both of you see me here enough to know that like I've embraced this place. I love coming here, love experiencing people. And even like there's times like, even last week I was going to go sit by the pool and just work on my laptop. And I was like, I really need to do better about talking to people. I need to do something. I don't know if I want to. And all of a sudden someone's like, oh, hey, do you work at a company I'm employed at? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, oh, my sister works there. And 2.5 hours later,
love that.
I'm like, oh my gosh, like here's your number, here's my number. Let's follow each other. Like, let's hang out. And like, it just continually and perpetually keeps being a reminder of it's a place that we can have those social connections, feel that sense of community, and have it fostered and grown, and have it reminded all the time. So it's not like this show up once and like, oh, I met someone, but people are still guarded and not there. And I keep talking to other members and other people, and it just keeps being that way. And I bring friends here, and they're like, well, how do I join? Like, this seems like amazing. And it is really such a cool experience that you guys have been able to foster. So kudos to you guys, and the execution and the curation and like the ambiance and the vibe and everything. It's like kind of whatever you need, you can find some extent here. So I know there wasn't a ton of like natural experience before it, but I think you guys both hit it out of the park. And I know it took a village to get it all done. And like, all the bartenders are some of the coolest people ever, and they like remember my life, and we get to sit there and bullshit. And I see my morning crew, and I go to the gym and go get my coffee of Amelia and Kenzie, and it's so fun to have that and the right people. And like, and obviously I don't know how many people know this, but it is also intentional by you guys. Cause like the way I met Charlie is, I applied, I get an email saying, hey, we like to interview everybody before to make sure we're letting in the right people. And then I'm sitting in the back of my van.
You're in the van.
I think I was in Vermont or something. And cool. He's like, well, we look for people who like live life and try to be present. And I think you check that box. So like, what questions do you have for me? And
like, you're in a van, dude. You're cool. Like, this is in. Let's go.
Either that or he's a homeless person down the river. One of the
He took the risk. And I didn't think it worked out. But so thinking about where Edison House is now, I mean, what does the future entail? I mean, where does this vision take you guys?
I mean, we're still super focused on Salt Lake. We want to grow. We are interested. We're looking at other markets. Right now, we're still tuning the car. I love that story that you met someone here and had that connection and like became, friends, and hopefully that grows. When I hear that, I'm like, that is why I do this. Like, I love hearing that. Because I'm really like reflecting on what you said about how hard it is to meet people and build a community as an adult. Everybody that I talk to feels this way. Yeah. And I think a lot of it has to do with the world that we've grown up in that is unique to the world that our parents grew up in. It's so easy to and I have the same feeling all the time as laughing when you're like, I don't want to get out of the house today. I can just sit home and I can get that dopamine drip by being on Netflix, by, getting on my phone, by staring at Instagram, whatever the things that we all do. And I find myself getting pulled into that a lot in a way that I don't feel good about. Mm-hmm. And every time that I'm like, you know what, I'm going to go out, I'm going to go talk to somebody, I'm going to meet someone. I always leave those conversations, especially with people at the club. And I'm like, that was awesome. That was so fulfilling as a human. I don't know what it is. I know it's something in our software in our brain, but it just really fills me up. But I always feel that pull. That's I don't want to do this today. This is, I want to sit home and watch Netflix. And I feel like we all have that because that's that easy dopamine drip.
I'm tired. It's been a long day. I don't want to do anything.
Right. And our parents didn't have that though. No. I don't think they didn't have that ability to get that sort of cheap dopamine drip where they can just turn on Netflix. They would be like, they'd be like, well, I'm going to go down to the bar down the street because otherwise I'm going to sit here twiddling my thumbs. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so I just think that this world that we've grown up in is sort of dangerous from that perspective. It's kind of a honeypot. And I find myself even challenged with that. And I spend all day in a social club, but just to, I know I digress, but just to talk about the future, I mean, we're looking at expanding Edison House, but we're still super focused on number one. We just launched an initiative that we're really excited about called Clubs, which is a way for us to help build community within the community of Edison House around identities and interests. We've spent a lot of time thinking about what are some of the great communities and why are they great communities? One of them really is proximity. When you're talking about earlier, if I could, go back to school where it's recess and we're all there together, just being in proximity builds community. And I think there's an extra layer you can get deeper on, which is around you're connected on something. And we think the great natural things to connect on are identity and interests. And so we just launched Clubs, which we're really excited about. We have 6 different clubs based around interest and identity. We have women, on the identity side, women, BIPOC, LGBTQ. Did I miss something? What are you laughing about?
We have 8.
Oh, we have 8. Sorry, I can't even keep track of them. They're growing
but you got the 3 identity clubs.
Those are 3 identity clubs, and we have outdoors club, concert, Illuminates, which is our charitable organization. I'm really excited about that. What are the last 2?
The wine club, and the book club.
Wine club and the book club. And so that's when we think about the future, we're still thinking about Edison House 1 and how do we fulfill that mission even more so than we have today. Keep pushing that forward and saying, how do we continue to help people build connections, build community, meet one another, make friendships. So when I think about the future of Edison House, in the far off, I see hopefully 2, 3, 4. But right now, really what we're thinking about is 1. Yeah. Being how do we dial this in and really fulfill that mission in such a way that we feel so good about it that we're ready to take it to the next market. I don't know. What do you, George? Do you think more about number 2, 3, and 4 than I do? I mean,
probably. I think you'd
more risk averse, right?
That's why you're both together. One focuses here, one focuses there.
Exactly. But I think what you were saying is broadly correct. I mean, from a business perspective, we sync so closely that we're aligned on that. It's very important for us to get the first one right and to get it to a place where we can responsibly start looking at expansion. And I think we're close, but we're not quite there yet. I think through the end of the year, it would be foolish of us to start, taking our eye off that ball just yet. But I do think probably before you will, Charlie, I will start to maybe push us in that direction. It's a little bit the dynamic that we have from a risk perspective and just like the roles that we play. But I do think that we're very closely aligned on where we see it going. You know, I think taking that mantra of build community, bring beautiful spaces to people, create spaces for people to connect. Like that's what Edison House is. It's not a building of four walls, right? It's about the people who are in it. And I think there are ample opportunities for us to sort of take that mission and press it out into the world. And that's what we'll do.
I know. I like the way you said that. Is like Edison's core principle boiled down as community. And the more that you can have more hyper-focused communities, more nuanced communities, more reason for people to come, show up, to ignore that dopamine drip, that Netflix, that Instagram, that whatever it may be, and be present here, I think will only set more success as, 2, 3, 4, 5, 50, 100, whatever that might be.
Right.
But until it is a place that people want to go, like the community is the community. The building's just a bunch of like bricks and $400,000 of steel. But I think that you absolutely hit it on the head as far as the priorities goes, is nail the community side and then, replicate it once it's there. Because it'd be so easy for, a lot of other people to be in your situation, be like, okay, it's successful. People are paying. We have members. Now let's keep let's just get as many of these as we can.
Yeah.
And then we can go swim in our gold coffers and go right off into the sunset.
Well, there's also a critical mass component. I think the thing is a year from now, the risk profile goes way down as we continue to grow membership, and we are growing membership for anybody listening.
What are we up to right now? Do you know off the top of your head?
I won't disclose that, but there has been when we first opened, we paused growing membership. And that narrative has been sort of misconstrued as you can't get in. And so that's actually been one of the challenges that we've had in growing membership is we'll talk to people who said, oh, I heard it's like an 18-month wait list. It's like, no, that's not the case. We're grateful to have a lot of interested parties, but we are
great people get in.
Yeah, but and we're as inclusive as an exclusive club can reasonably be. So our goal is to grow the membership to the point where the vibe really hits the way that we want it to, and it does most of the time.
Totally.
But there's still plenty of opportunity for us to bring people into this building without deteriorating the quality of the product. In fact, I think the more members we can add, at least for the time being, the more dynamic the community is going to be. And that's kind of the point I'm making, which is as we mature the community and the membership, the more self-sustaining the business becomes. And at that time, it'll be responsible for us to then be able to look elsewhere to expand the business.
And on that point, like one of the great learnings I think we had is that this building is freaking big and it swallows people. Like we had 250 people here last Friday. I want to say was that country night? We had a country night. It was really fun. We probably had 250 people check in, and the building had energy, but it was not full by any means.
Yeah.
And that's like kind of a double-edged sword for us. Like that's really exciting because it means that we can have more members than we originally thought when we first built the business model. And the other side of it is we need to make sure that we grow and maintain that energy because the building can swallow people. It's just so big.
Oh, without a doubt, especially with like summer's now here, the roof is popping.
Yeah.
And because I remember when I first started coming, on the weekend it would be busy, especially when it was new.
Yeah.
But then you'd come on a weekday and be like, I think I might be the only person here.
There's probably 100 people in the building.
Exactly. And even more so too. And that's one thing I love. And there's a story I'll share with you where it was Easter. And it was me and 3 friends, and we were a little hungover, and we just wanted to get brunch somewhere.
Yeah.
And so I'm hopping on the phone, calling every typical brunch spot in Salt Lake. They're like, yeah, it'll be an hour, 2 hours, hour and a half. And I'm like, shit, I'm just hungry, and I just want some food.
Yeah, seriously.
And then I'm like, let me make one quick call. So I call, Edison, friend that's like, yeah, there's a table waiting for you. And so we walk in, we sit down, we have brunch, and we have this space to ourselves, and it's nice. And it's so cool too, because it's almost like a pick your own type of night where Edison is really good about if I just want to go with 3 people and just go sit down and have a drink and chat, there's that. If I want to go sit around with 20 people and have that drunken kind of like, let's call it ragey night, like you can have that too.
Yeah.
Or if you want to come see a show, or like there's something for everyone. And like the other thing I was going to add to what you guys were talking about is kind of like what you've been curating is like the diversity is so amazingly done. Because like if you walk into, I mean, the country club, for example, it's going to be a bunch of stuffy old white people that are just pretentious and hate each other. And if you remember there and you don't feel differently, then prove me wrong. But or here it's like, oh, I walk in and I see like everybody from the age of 21 to like 61. And there's people covered in tattoos. There's people not covered in tattoos. And like, it just, the diversity and seeing the people has been really awesome. Cause that was kind of one of the worries I had before I joined is like, I'm like, what is this just going to be like my high school friends and carbon copies of them? But absolutely wrong. Like it's been every walking way of life, but it's also like good people. So it's not just this like revolving door of whoever wants to come, but it's like good people, but good, very different people to create this like foundation of community.
Yeah, we've worked really hard and intentional on that. We are broadly way more diverse than Salt Lake is. And when it comes to industry too, which, you know, is at least for me personally, like when I was in Chicago in finance, like I ran in like finance circles. From an industry perspective, no single industry makes up more than 15% of our membership. So, and that adds another really interesting dynamic where you just run into people you would never run into. You know, I have a friend here, Stu, and he runs a mountaineering film festival of all things, right? And I'm like, I would never run into Stuart, and he's like the coolest, most interesting cat on the planet. Yeah. And I love that sort of bouncing into people that are not the type that you'd normally have in your orbit. And then all of them, to your point, we work really hard to curate on 4 different axes. And it sounds sort of like a little bit, cliche or tchotchke, but it works. And we really believe it, which is we look for people who are interesting, social, and kind. And those are the 3 things that we look for in people. And the last one is authentic, which is like, just be yourself beyond those 4 things. And we found that to work really well because those are the types of people you want to be around. You want to be around people who are interesting and social, and they're just nice, good people.
Yeah.
And I feel like at least the majority of our membership are very interesting and have a lot of, cool things to say and have interesting life experiences, which is not always the case with everybody in the world, so.
It's like, now that you say that, I can't think I've ever like walked in and had like one of those typical, like, let's call it a Karen moment where someone's yelling at a bartender for some stupid thing. Like everyone's like good people, like through and through.
Yeah. I mean, we work really hard for that. I mean, we had every member is either referred by a current member that we know or is interviewed. And it takes a lot of work. I mean, our membership team, Lauren, who's our head of membership, is amazing. Lindsay, who's our community manager, is amazing. They've interviewed probably, a lot of people. They've done hundreds of hours of interviews, probably, or 100 hours of interviews, whatever it is.
More than that.
Yeah, a lot of interview time.
Most popular people in Salt Lake by this time.
Oh my gosh, she knows everybody. She says she's gotten bribed. I mean, she has a bunch of funny stories about that.
Listen, I suck, but take $1,000 and just let me in.
But we take it seriously, and that's part of the reason that we feel, the community has been so awesome, so full of great people.
Yeah, no, definitely. Kudos to you guys. But I kind of want to transition a little bit and just think about, Salt Lake City itself, Utah itself. What excites you guys about being back in the city, back in Utah? Is there anything particular that draws you back to here specifically, or something you're excited about, or just kind of a good place to call home for the time being?
Well, part of the reason we came back here is because we understood the market really well. We knew more people. There was a home court advantage. Beyond that, though, I think there is a special opportunity in Salt Lake as it relates to the evolution of the city that doesn't exist in most places. The city is very different than the one I grew up in. And as we discussed earlier in the conversation, the predominant religion here, not in any good or bad way, just in my observation, has created a dynamic here where there's the LDS population and then there's the non-LDS population, and that counterculture, for lack of a better word, is very strong. And that's been around for a very long time. And so there has always been this undercurrent where that non-LDS population is sort of looking for their identity. And I think that's kind of what we're starting to see. It's what we've capitalized on to some degree here at Edison House is there's a huge influx of people who are moving here. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of growth and change. I think the number of people living in downtown proper is going to double in the next 5 years, right? And a lot of that is about how does this city that has access to the outdoors in a way that no other city in the United States does, right? There's so many sort of geographic advantages to living here. How does that counterculture sort of like find their own identity? How does the city sort of grow up in a way? Because the city has been underdeveloped for a city of its size, right? I mean, for a very long time, there wasn't somewhere you could go and get a drink. I mean, the liquor laws here are infamous, right?
You used to have your membership card. You'd have to
right,
have.
I know, yeah. There's an irony there, right? But yeah, so I think Salt Lake is just in a really interesting place where it's like there is this real grassroots movement to unpack what Salt Lake City really is and really can be. And the strength of that counterculture is there's a lot of momentum there. And we're just hope to be a part of it.
No, absolutely. Like I love that you kind of mentioned that counterculture because with like, again, going back to like the LDS comparison of like, there's such a strong community there. And then, I mean, people who like leave the church or come, like they still seek that community because it's one of the biggest losses from leaving that. And I mean, that's one thing I've learned kind of in my, like 20s is like, there's so many subcultures in Utah that are so strong and so accepting that you wouldn't even know. Like, I mean, I'm wearing a heavy metal shop t-shirt and like, there's a huge, underground metal community. There's a drum and bass community. We have one of the strongest LGBTQ communities. I mean, ski community and culture. Like I could go on and on and on. And they're usually all so accepting where if you were to just like, to sound cliche and almost boomerang, go on Facebook and find a group, you could join it pretty quick and like find friends and meet up and like start to grow something. And I think that's only going to proliferate as we continue to go forward and have people come and try to find that community. And I think this is going to be a nice oasis for so many people who really do just want to find those social connections and community for sure. It's like the way that you put that.
Yeah, I'm excited to see Salt Lake sort of, for lack of a better word, grow up or evolve into a large city. Coming from Chicago, and I was just there last week. I mean, and maybe this is, I don't know how many people feel this way, but so maybe it's just me, but like I crave and I love the energy of a big city. Like I went down to Chicago and it was like noon on a Thursday and me and my friends went out to a restaurant out on like the lake and it was like, or on the river, and it was just like electric. It was like, there's 100 people in this restaurant. There's people streaming by, like everyone's having drinks. Like it was sunny out and I was like, wow, this is so cool. There's so much energy. People are out of the house. They're, experiencing and walking around, experiencing the city. And I feel like Salt Lake traditionally hasn't had that so much. I think some of it is that people spend a lot of time outdoors in the mountains and whatnot. But I do think that Salt Lake is going to grow into that and sort of take on some of that big city energy and nightlife. And we hope to be a part of that. And I'm really excited to see Salt Lake sort of evolve into that sort of next phase of being a larger city. Because I absolutely adored Chicago. I love New York. I love Los Angeles. And I see Salt Lake hopefully on the trajectory of pulling in some of those aspects, hopefully just the good ones. There's always growing pains, but sort of that big city energy that I think a lot of people really like.
No, totally. And I think about kind of the macroeconomic and macro just pictures in general that's happened over the past few years from COVID, especially like comparing some of the biggest cities before then that were thriving. I mean, like the New Yorks, the LAs, the San Franciscos, the Seattles, that now post-COVID aren't, in my opinion, like in the same prime that they were. Mm-hmm. And there's been just so many changes. But then we've also seen this growth of like these, let's call them secondary and tertiary cities where, Salt Lake's on the map bigger. Denver's shown growth. Not North Carolina. Nashville's been booming. Charleston, like these other cities are starting to grow. And like you look at history and like It's not like New York, as soon as the Pilgrims landed, they're like, this is the biggest city, financial hub of the world. Everybody who wants to do commerce has to come here. Like, it was built that way. And now I see Utah especially Salt Lake being one of those those front runners of a potential new hub like that. And like to your guys' point, like those things you mentioned are key things that have to happen to get kind of Salt Lake through this new identity crisis that it finds itself in. And I'm super optimistic about it. I love this place. I love the outdoors. I love the people. I obviously have a ton of bias, but so excited for kind of what's coming and what's to grow. Cause I mean, like you were saying, Charlie, like or maybe it was George, the Utah we grew up in is not even close. Like, I was driving through Sugar House the other day and I like was sitting at the intersection. I closed my eyes. I'm like, what did this used to look like? I can't remember. And I mean, you drive down 4 South, you see all the apartment buildings everywhere now. And it makes me excited, and seeing how many people come. Always going to be growing pains, but excited for the future and excited to see how Edison House is going to play a pivotal role for and be that community for all these, this almost this lighthouse for the new people that show up. So I'm excited for what you've done, and kudos for the way that you guys have done it.
Thank you. Yeah, we're working on it, and it's to George's point, as he said earlier, I think it's only going to get better too. I mean, the more as we continue to grow and bring in more amazing people, like it's on a curve up, which is really exciting.
Totally.
And to put in a plug, if there's any city planners out there, the one thing I want Salt Lake to figure out is the public transport. I really wish they could figure. It's so hard to figure out. Chicago's got it figured out. New York, of course, has it figured out. But God, I wish it had the ability to do public transport and walk. That's the one thing I think it's missing.
I miss living in a walking city. So
I just
bad.
love walking cities, man. I mean, it's so charming, but that's okay.
My hypothesis is we're going to be an e-bike city in no time because of how spread out we are.
That would be radical.
Because I don't know if you guys know this, but so when I was living in Hardware, there's a front runner station across the street.
Yeah.
And I had to go down to Lehigh every now and then. Well, I mean, then I was going probably like 3 days a week. And I was like, well, I don't like driving because it's like, I mean, at least an hour out of my day gone. And so I was like, wait a minute, if I buy an electric scooter, I can hop on the train, I can work on the train, then I can scooter from the Lehigh train station to the office and then do that. And then I actually don't lose any time except for like a collective 10 minutes of the scooter there and back. And so that was the first time I literally like double dived into like Salt Lake public transit, and it was good.
Yeah.
But once you start using tracks and buses in Utah, now you're just like, hard stop. Nope, this isn't working. And I'd love it to, but I agree. Like any city planner,
he's listening.
Please. I'll run for something. I'll vote for you.
Same thing. In Chicago, I rode the L everywhere. I loved it, and the bus system was great. And I moved back to Salt Lake, and that was the one thing I was bummed about. I was like, I miss being able to walk everywhere. And part of it too, there's density in that you can walk to a lot of restaurants, bars, and coffee shops from where you live based on how the city is set up. And Salt Lake is not really set up for that, And so there's definitely a way to solve the problem, but I'm sure I haven't thought about it at all.
Yeah. There's someone who can and will.
Somebody else whose job it is, right?
Exactly.
We know what we want.
Totally.
Just know how to get it.
So before we sign off here, kind of 2 quick questions for you guys is one, if you were to invite someone to be on this podcast, who would you want to hear their story of and why?
D. Brewer's one person.
Yeah, D. Brewer's
cool.
a good pick. Yeah,
he's the executive director of
Downtown
Alliance.
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah.
So he's a great guy. He's a really nice guy.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm a big fan of. I don't know if do you know Annie Kwan and Sky Emerson are really great. Mm-mm. They're like a power lesbian couple in town. They're wonderful. They're 2 of my dear friends. And they're just really interesting people. They actually have their own
members.
Yeah, they are members, and actually they have their own podcast. Actually, you should get the 3 of them. The third person on their podcast is Amy Redford, who is Robert's daughter.
Oh, interesting.
And the 3 of them have the Scrappy Broads podcast, which is very it's about like scrappy broads, right? But like they're all just very interesting. Like obviously Amy comes from like a film background, but Sky is like a screenwriter, and Annie's worked with Skyhop, and they're just very interesting, successful people, and they're lovely. Missy Grease is kind of cool. She's about in public. Public Coffee is
Oh,
cool.
yeah.
She's an interesting cat.
That's a cool brand that's become so popular.
Yeah. But I mean, the truth is like there are the challenge is not in answering, like finding an interesting person. It's like in combing through all the interesting people that we know.
Totally.
Who, because Salt Lake is like, that's what's happening here. Right. I mean, Charlie, you mentioned
Mickey's the first one that comes to mind. Unfortunately, Mickey Galvin.
Oh yeah.
One of our dear friends who passed away, but he would have been great.
Yeah. I mean, I'm biased, but my friend Marlo is a drag queen. He's a super interesting cat. I find Marlo's an interesting dude.
I dig that.
Yeah. I've come from the LGBT community, obviously. So my mind goes there, but, Troy Williams is a really interesting guy. He runs the Equality Utah. And he's a really thoughtful person. He's not just, there are a lot of people who live in, the political world and kind of don't know how to like see see the world from the other perspective. And he's somebody who I really admire the way that he sort of like approaches the world. Yeah. So there's a handful of names for you.
Yeah, man, I need to think on that one because I have a couple names that come to mind and nobody really jumps. I was like, wow, this is incredible.
Okay.
I know if I...
So then the second question is, what Utah-related media or people do you follow to, keep in touch with, what's going on?
The honest truth is, I believe this is true for Charlie too. We're not huge social media people because is that what you mean? Like from a social media perspective?
Either or, yes. However you want to define it.
Yeah. We follow from a social media perspective. That's not how I engage.
You don't need social media. You just walk in here.
The social clubs, right? Well, it's the whole thing, right? Get off the dopamine drip.
I really don't. When you ask the question, I'm like, wow, I actually don't really follow anyone on the media side in Salt Lake, and I think part of that is kind of exactly what you just said, which is like, I get all of my news and information about what's going on in Salt Lake from the people I run into at the club. Yeah. I didn't know it. It kind of sounds like a cop out. I read I read the Wall Street Journal and I do all this sort of like more, U.S. national or global type of media. But when it comes to like, how do I get my information about what's going on in Salt Lake? For me, it's really all the people I know and I run into at the club.
Yeah. It's a very like old school approach, and it's totally true. Like, all of I'm grateful to be friends with a lot of people who are, making a difference in Salt Lake City. And almost all of those relationships are in person via, like legitimate friendships. I can throw out names, like David Parkinson's a good example of somebody who's very involved in a lot of boards. I do some board, participation. I'm on the board at End Circle and at the Symphony and Opera and UMOCA. So like all of the people who are involved through that. But it's very much like an old school approach, and that's intentional. Got it.
Anything else you guys want to plug? Any restaurants, friends, businesses? Anything else going on that people should know about?
Salt Lake is awesome. Come here, people. It's funny. I feel like there's always the joke that it's like, Salt Lake is not that great. Don't come here, people, which is like, I feel like there's kind of a joke about that. I don't know if I'm wrong.
No, you're absolutely
on the internet. And it's like, I feel completely the opposite way. I'm like, let's get this, let's rev the engine, put some gas in it,
But support local. Yeah. Don't go to McDonald's.
Absolutely.
No, don't do that.
Yeah. But come check out Edison House if you can. Grab a friend, take a tour, come see what it's all about, and come meet George and Charlie for yourselves and see what all the magic's about.
Perfect.
We don't leave, so.
I'm surprised you guys don't have a bed somewhere that you just kind of chill.
I've never slept here.
We got wine Wednesday tonight and then trivia, so the club will be rocking. Yeah, Wednesdays are fun.
There we go. Well, both of you, thank you so much for the time. It has been amazing just get to know you both better and hear more about the story of Edison House. And yeah, everyone's grateful for those that have been involved, and hopefully just keeps on being more of the great place that it is.
Thank you. Thank you for being a supporter and a member too.
Gladly, all day, every 100%. Day.